It was very different from the theater today. Really simple question, simple idea. When you go into a theater today, by raise of hands, what do you always see in that theater? By raise of hands, very simple. Sarah?
The stage.
There is a stage, absolutely. What else is in that theater when you walk in? Can you? Well, but where are the people? Where else? In chairs. There are chairs for people, and there's a stage. Now, let me ask you, it will seem a very stupid question. Where is that stage in relation to those chairs? In front! Yes! It seems so obvious, right? There's chairs with people here, and then over here, separate from them, is the stage. There's a separation, right? We're not going to get confused. Usually the stage is lit pretty brightly. Is the audience lit brightly during the show? No, it's pretty dim, so you can focus on the stage, or if it's really boring, you can go to sleep. But what that means is, there's two different worlds, right? The audience is over there, and the actor's over here. And if you're bored, you can go to sleep out there. Actors aren't going to notice it. And the actors up here, especially if you've ever been on stage, you've got these bright lights shining in your face. You can barely even see the audience. The audience may as well not even be there. So there's two worlds, the world on stage, the world of the audience, and there's not a lot of interaction in between them. Shakespeare's theater was different than this. Not just different, it's almost the opposite of this. Like you took a modern theater and turned it inside out. To begin with, most modern theaters are square, right? Shakespeare's theater was round. It was a big round building. This is sort of looking down on it from the sky. And in this big round building, the big round building was called the Globe, by the way, because it was round, and they weren't very creative. In this big round building, the only thing in this building is a big open courtyard. So basically, his theater was a giant wooden donut. And the stage sticks out into the middle of that yard. It's a thrust stage. It's the original thrust stage. And people would come in through a door here, and they would stand in this yard, this courtyard, around the stage, right up against the stage. They would be packed in there. They would literally be this close to the stage. Hi there, Kennedy. How you doing? Excellent. Good to see you. Because that's the thing. Unlike in a modern theater, where the audience is over there, actors are over here, in Shakespeare's theater, the audience and the actors are all piled up next to one another. And they can't ignore them like you can today. Another thing that affects that, there's no roof over this courtyard. Why do you think that is? Yeah?
Because there was no ladders back then?
Well, they didn't have to have ladders, but there was something they didn't have. Sophia?
Light.
Light! Exactly! There's no electric light. This is a big building. If you have tried to light it with candles and torches, you will burn the place down. It did. It burned down twice. So there's no roof to take advantage of the fact that we have a giant ball of fire in the sky. That's what they use for all of their lighting. That's also why if you look at Shakespeare's plays, the first act will always begin in the day, and the last act will be toward evening, because to take advantage of the fact that the sun sets. So if you went to see a play in Shakespeare's time, you would go in the afternoon. You would not go in the evening. It would be too dark. You couldn't see. But that means, is the stage brightly lit and the audience in darkness? No, unless there's very strange cloud patterns. That's not the case. So in Shakespeare's theater, the actors can see the audience as well as the audience can see the actors, and they're very close to one another. So there's a lot more interaction. So in Shakespeare's play, since the actors are this close, the actors may be doing a scene, and they may turn to the audience and say, you know, I really hate this person. Should I punch them? Yes? Great, I'll punch them. And I will then punch them. So there's that sort of interaction in Shakespeare's plays that you don't see in most modern plays. And certainly not in like modern television or movies. If I was watching a movie and the character on screen turned and said, "Hi, Mr. Finley, how are you?" I would run screaming from that theater. I would be terrified. But that happens all the time in Shakespeare's plays. There is interaction. There's even a fancy word for it. We call them asides, because the character on stage turns aside and talks directly to the audience, and then they're back into the scene. And it's because they're all under the same light, and they're all crowded into the same space. So very different from a modern sort of proscenium theater. And when I say they are crowded into this space, I'm talking very literally. You can go to London nowadays, and you can actually visit a recreation of the Globe. It's exactly the same as it was in Shakespeare's time. It's really, really cool. I go there every time I go to London. And they say that you can safely fit inside the Globe Theatre 1,500 people. It's a lot of people, right? But, see, that's how many you can fit in safely. In Shakespeare's time, they didn't care about doing things safely. Oh, so what if they die in a fire? They'll just die of the plague next week. So they would just cram in as many people as would buy tickets. So instead of there being 1,500 people, or even 2,000 people, or even 2,500 people. Most shows, they would cram 3,000 people into the Globe Theatre. So you would be packed in there tighter than the tightest rock concert that you have ever been to. And I should point out that these are not people that you want to be standing that close to. Because in Shakespeare's time, people would only bathe, on average, once or twice a year. Yes, let that sink in for just a minute here. It's not like, oh, the guy next to me forgot to bathe yesterday. It's, oh, the guy next to me forgot to bathe last April. It would have been disgusting. 3,000 people not bathing. It was because they didn't understand medicine. They thought they bathed too much, it would make them sick, which is, of course, crazy. But the point is, I don't bring this up to make you sick to your stomach. I don't bring this up to make you nauseated. But because when people hear the word Shakespeare, they often get this idea in their head. Because he lived a long time ago, and then he lived in England, he must have been very prim and very proper. I must have worn a frilly lace collar and spoken with an old accent, and spoken with kings and queens, and it's a lie! It's a gigantic lie, and it makes me crazy. It makes me very angry, because there's nothing to do with the truth. Shakespeare was not writing for kings and queens, he was writing for the 3,000 dirty, stinky people who cannot read. And that's the important thing to keep in mind when you're doing Shakespeare. It was not written for kings and queens primarily, he did sometimes. It was written to entertain people, to entertain all people, including the stinky, smelly people. The stinky, smelly, and I should point out, very violent people. We tend to think of ourselves nowadays as violent. We like horror movies and violent video games. We are nothing compared to these people. This is why virtually every one of Shakespeare's plays has a sword fight in it. So to be an actor in a Shakespeare play, you need to know how to sword fight, and they love their special effects. They love to take a goat's stomach from a dead goat, fill it with goat blood, tie it around their abdomen, under their costume, so when they are stabbed on stage, the goat blood would come spurting out. Now, again, if I'm this close to the audience, where is the goat blood going? Yes, right onto Kennedy's face. It's okay, it's been 6 months since anyone's had a bath, what's a little extra goat blood? But that was the world of his plays. It wasn't prim and proper and fancy, it was rough and tumble and covered in goat blood. Another example of the violence of this time, they had this thing, this horrible thing, called bear baiting. Has anyone heard of this? No. This is ghastly. They would have a big round arena, and Zach, you have your eyes up here as well, thank you so much. They would have a big round arena, and they would chain up in the middle of the arena a bear, usually a big Russian bear, and then they would have wild dogs fight the bear, and the audience would take bets as to who would die first. Sometimes they would have like a bull fighting the bear. There's actually an advertisement I've seen from this period that's been kept of a Russian bear set upon by a bull ridden by an imported monkey. So you had a monkey on a bull with a bear. I personally would not have bet on the monkey. But there would be these fights, very, very violent. And then oftentimes in the afternoon, you've got this big arena, but you're out of bears, they're all dead, what are you going to do? Well, they would slap down a stage and do a play there in the afternoon. We know they did this at a place called the Rose, right next to the Globe, which is where we think Romeo and Juliet premiered. So when you go to see Shakespeare's plays, not only might you be packed in with 3,000 other dirty, stinky people, you might be standing ankle deep in blood from that morning's bear baiting. That was the world of Shakespeare's plays, not pretty and fancy or all of these other things. So that's the first idea to get out of your mind. There's also, related to that, I think one of the reasons people think Shakespeare's plays have to be sort of pretty and fancy is that we have this idea of the British accent and this very upper class having cups of tea sort of accent. But that did not exist in Shakespeare's time. The British accent, as we understand it today, did not develop for about 200 years after Shakespeare died. The way they actually spoke in England in Shakespeare's time is actually closer to the way we speak here in the South. Actually, the closest thing, if you ever go to the Outer Banks here in North Carolina, to the island of Ocracoke, the accent that they have on Ocracoke Island is very similar to the way they talked in England in Shakespeare's time. So, all of this is just to get us away from this idea that Shakespeare was somehow pretty or fancy or anything like that. He wasn't. He was very rough and tumble, quite violent, and really written for all types of people. But it is true that it sounds different. It does not sound like you and I speaking. Even though his plays are often very bloody and very violent, they do not sound like Dexter or CSI Miami, although they might still be talking about the same sort of murders and blood spatter and that sort of thing. They sound different. We're going to talk in just a moment about why that is, why they sound different. But several of you had questions a moment ago, so let me just take this moment to answer the questions.